everybody. My name is Amber Ashton. I'm the business development director with BDO. I'm really just here for balance. Every other panel had 4 up here, so I wanted to make sure we weren't unweighted on our side.
And for questions, she's the one answering the questions.
So Roseanne and the FBI group did a really nice job. They've stacked these presentations up. We will be discussing the business implications of a virtual workforce. We've talked a lot today about the shifts in the labor market, employee expectations, retaining talent, and now we're going to discuss a little bit more about what that means for you as business leaders, some things to consider. Among that's it. So we'll talk a little bit high level about the shifts in the labor market, just any additional comments that our team might have, some of the tax implications as well, data privacy, security, and cyber risk implications that you may want to consider when you have a remote workforce. And then how you might be able to mitigate that with more of a formal policy if those haven't done so as well. So I will turn it over to the group just to introduce themselves. Maybe we'll just start right down.
Let's go down the list. My name is Eric Nelson. I'm the Office Managing Partner for Tax Services for BDO. Pleasure to be here and meet you.
Hi, I'm Greg Schu. I'm a partner in our advisory cyber area, and so I'll hit that topic. And interested in questions, ask them during the session if you'd like. Nice to be here.
And I'm Ronii Rizzo. I head our Global Payroll and Employment Tax Group for BDO USA. So anytime you have individuals crossing borders, whether they be multi-state or international borders, there are complexities around the reporting obligations. And that's what our group would focus on supporting, as well as the policy and some of the other matters we'll talk about today.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. I'm going to have the first few slides. We in the last minute here, kind of decided to shift our approach, and of course adapting to change and changing in the moment. I think we're all fairly well skilled at that now, better than ever. But what we're going to do is I want to move past some of the things that have probably already been discussed this morning. I think if I were to focus on it, it would sound maybe a little redundant. But I'll touch on a few points. It's not lost on any one of us that we've been through more in the last 18 plus months than probably any time in our lifetimes. And I think of it more of a marathon than a sprint. And the marathon takes proper nourishment, proper focus, intention, and good nutrition overall, and really listening at the same time to what your body is telling you, especially when you get beyond that 20-mile mark. I will admit firsthand that I have not ran a marathon, but I have as a cyclist, I have biked a number of centuries, and I know what it means to dig deep there for those last 15 miles when everything's cramping and hurting, and no matter what you take by way of electrolytes, your body's telling you to knock it off. And that was a more competitive one. Proud to say we did the Tour de Tonka in less than 5 hours, so that was a few years ago. But where I'm going with this is it's really important to listen. And just as we were talking before we sat down here, Greg, my partner here, had been attending the first part of the first 2 hours here, and he said, "Have you looked around the room? So don't you find it interesting that we're all talking? Maybe it was even." Yeah, we were just talking about, we're talking about what we think we should be doing and how we should be doing it. And what would we say is the average age of the professional in this room right now?
27.
And what's
for those in denial, 27, that works. Yeah, that's good. Now, I think it's important that it's interesting to me that we're talking about what we think as the more senior executives versus what we probably maybe should be or how to do it, and there are no answers. One thing is for certain, just as we stand here and Greg and I are talking and talking to others about our young professionals, we have differences in audit and tax and in advisory, and I think it's a function of how we operated, at least in professional services going back before the pandemic, and where we were headed, and how those were probably amplified, and now we just feel like sometimes we're making it up on the fly, and how from day to day. So it is clear that it is one size does not fit all, and it's more important than ever that we're listening to the body of our business and what it's telling us, And that really is our labor force, our skilled individuals who really are the meat and potatoes of what we do. Particularly in any kind of professional services environment, they are the asset. And if the body is telling you one thing, or different parts of the body are telling you one thing, you probably have to think more diverse than you ever had before as a senior executive, leading and inspiring this new generation or these new generations. And that's been one of the large challenges for me personally is listening. My wife would tell me that I've never been very good at it. Well, let's just say I've done a lot of learning over the last 2 years. So anyways, when we talk about the shifts in the labor market, I think if you were to imagine, if possible, what it was like before we went into the pandemic, there was a lot of talk about artificial intelligence. There were all kinds of interesting podcasts and conversations around what the future held. What was at the minds of CEOs, CFOs, COOs as it relates to cybersecurity, it relates to automation, streamlining, freeing ourselves so that we can add more value as human beings as more of an analytical type of creature than a doer, depending on, again, what your chosen industry is. And so I think before the pandemic, we were already thinking about working with a leaner workforce. There were opportunities for companies to consolidate and capitalize on synergies, so the M&A business was pretty solid. There was really, I think, an increased reliance on contract employees, now more than ever with hybrid work arrangements and remote work arrangements. And then, there always is the age-old cost-benefit analysis, containing and controlling costs, and moving between how do I grow, how do I improve my bottom line, because you can only take cost containment and cost management so far. The rest is really left up to innovative thinking, creative thinking, and capitalizing on whatever it is you do and the value that you provide to society. And then, of course, remote work and virtual assignments. I was a road warrior for a number of years. I would say within the public accounting profession, there was still this perception of the old dynamic of if you're not in the seat, you're not working. You're not at the desk, you must not be working. Probably about 12, 13 years ago, I recall seeing an article about a gentleman sitting on a beach in Tahiti with his laptop and his sat phone doing consulting work. And all he had to do was provide that value, written and oral, to his customers, and they would just wire the funds into the bank account, and he was doing it from around the world. And I thought, that is really cool, because really we pay people for what occupies the space between the ears, rather than necessarily where the tush is located, per se. So that's kind of where I've come from. And I think that, at least in the professional services realm and public accounting, I was surprised to a great degree, but not entirely amazed by the ability of our teams to go remote last March of 2020, I should say, and be able to flip the switch right in the middle of the tax busy season, right after the March 15th deadline, going to lockdown. My team went from in the office, cranking 14-hour days out ahead of a deadline in a world of tax reform, overnight, shifted gears, fully remote, daily communications, learned what Teams was. I think we started on Zoom, actually, and then we went to Teams. And I could not have been more impressed with the resiliency and the adaptability of my young professionals to own it like that. Now, obviously, as time went on, there were challenges like we all have faced. And it has been nothing short of, I would say, a professional ping pong match. It feels like we're definitely hitting up against both sides of whatever spectrum you're looking at, as mentioned earlier. I think on the next slide. So when you look at transformation being at the forefront of most leaders' minds of businesses, particularly digital transformation, BDO did a study in 2021, and it was really remarkable. When you look at the results of this particular study. There was a point I was going to make here. Apologies. It really was interesting that it's such an astounding rate that more than 50% of organizations are adding new digital projects. Nearly half of them note that they are revising long-term digital strategies and accelerating some or all of their digital platforms. Earlier when we were listening to the other speakers, it seemed to be that there may have been differing perceptions on whether or not there's a labor shortage or is it a skills shortage. I think there's a shortage in general. And whether or not we call it the Great Resignation, I like to think of it more as the Great Awakening. I think that there is, it's clear that we have to adapt. It's clear as leaders of our businesses, we still have to address the fact that it's hard to find really talented people, and we owe it to our customers, to our shareholders, to look at how we can do it smarter, faster, and better, and leverage technology to the greatest extent. And that is a stopgap in most firms. Developing AI-enabled workforce strategy, 46%, decreasing headcount, 43% was an point of emphasis, and how to deal with that. Go ahead, Amber. I'm going to continue moving through this so we can get to the real substantive pieces of today's discussion. Based alone on the Microsoft 2021 Work Trend Index, 54% of employees are feeling overworked and burned out is rife through the organization despite heavy levels of productivity. And I think some of that comes from the fact that what we've learned through this process is how do we blur the lines. I used to always be able to shift gears when I hopped into my car and drove home from the office. When I got home, my wife knew that she had my frame of mind was going to be more about the home than the office. And as those lines became blurred through a mandate of working at home and then still this hybrid model, it's been an amazing process of adaptation where we've learned to be more intentional and more focused with our time to avoid the blurred lines, which really I think contribute to the fatigue. A number of my young professionals, it was along the lines of, are you really working? It feels like you're working because you're at home and you're at home 24/7. And you're working at times, and you're not working, or you're focusing on family or yourself or other things, but still it felt like work. So when you look at that burnout, some people are leaving their jobs just for a fresh start, for a fresh new environment, because they're so burnt out on the same old thing. Totally understand that. And you look at switching jobs, 41%. Increase in remote job postings on LinkedIn, a multiple of at least 5. And the power of LinkedIn now and what it's meant for many young professionals in general. So, when you look at the changing scope of global mobility, to Ronii's point earlier, and as a tax professional, I've decided to kind of maybe just not steal her thunder here, but one of the things that, the terms that Amber used earlier was tax implications or tax considerations. I like to say there's a tax consequence to every business transaction, and we're going to see a lot of that. A lot more of that. And it's not lost on any of the revenue authorities that there is an opportunity for additional revenue here, particularly with businesses where the C-suite might be relocating. So your management, even though you might be incorporated in Minnesota, but if your CEO is a resident of Puerto Rico, and I have a couple of situations like that, or Costa Rica, that can create a taxable presence in those jurisdictions by virtue of the leadership residing there. So that's a new interesting fact pattern that probably was there to some degree, but now more than ever given the facilitation of fully remote leadership. And just thinking about that, the tax consequence to every business transaction or decision, it's a matter of being more in tune to those things, and Ronii will talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. So this one, in terms of, go ahead, Amber. Oh, no, that's it. I'm sorry. That's it. Go back. Pardon me. This one really, what I found very interesting. 73% of workers want flexible work options to continue, but 67% are craving more in-person time. Again, ping pong ball, right? Well, what do you want? We're making this up as we go. And so I'm not telling you anything new. We're all living it, breathing it every day, and you've heard about it, different perspectives through the last 2 sessions. We had employees that packed up, some young professionals that packed up their pickup trucks with gear, mountain bikes, all of their belongings, and just left Minnesota when we went into full shutdown to go tour the country and work out in different locations. We had one individual that went down to North Carolina, then he went to New Mexico, then he went up to Colorado, he went out to California, and then he came back to Minnesota pretty much over the course of a year. But it didn't matter. He could do the work wherever he was. And so that was, that's obviously created a different tax consequence to him.
In all seriousness, did he have tax consequences for each of those moves?
Absolutely, depending on the number of days. He asked, and that's why for leadership, at least in our firm, and I'm sure in all the public accounting firms, when you're logging in your time, you actually log where you're doing the work so that payroll can manage that. And so that was a challenge. That was a big change for us, was enhanced transparency around where you're doing the work. And again, Ronii will talk about that in terms of multi-state, multi-jurisdiction considerations.
I get
But-
the heavy material.
You get the heavy material.
Heavy material. And so I don't want to go on too much further here because we have a short amount of time.
Yeah, and just from that other slide too, what we're seeing is they want the flexibility.
Yep.
And that's more from the work perspective. They want the interaction, but they don't want to have to go into the office for the interaction necessarily. So they want some of the same things that, you do. Somebody mentioned about the spontaneity and scheduling the spontaneity, and you can't do that. Well, when they did go in the office, everybody go out after work or go out for lunch or do those things from the interaction. So they still want that interaction. They just don't want to necessarily have to go into the office. So they're looking to leadership to say, we want to interact, but how else can we interact versus have to go into the office for the interaction. So I think that's why you see those high percentages on those items there.
Do we have any individuals here in public accounting at present? Okay. It's so interesting when we talk about this and we talk about labor shortage and what the firms are doing. I thought it was very bold and very interesting to see EY go ahead and continue to move forward with their relocation over to the Dayton building, just across the street from us, and go through with that, but also rethink and adapt in the moment. For BDO, we've got now our now and next senior leadership. It's really interesting to watch the public accounting firms. So the second tier firms like BDO, Grant Thornton, RSM, CLA, Baker Tilly. A lot of us, it seemed to be, we're watching to see what the Big Four does next. I think, personally, this is my opinion, a number of the Big Four firms...
And it doesn't represent BDO. No, just
Yes, but it's on my... No, that's good. It's interesting to me that it seems that everyone was really kind of holding their breath and who's going to make the next decision through the pandemic and who's going to do this and who's going to do that. And of course, there's a website out there called Going Concern that is kind of like the National Enquirer of Public Accounting. It's never a short on entertaining and bashing, but it is, and our people read it. Everybody looks at it, myself included, to see what leaked and what wasn't leaked yet. And so where I'm going with this is in public accounting, watching the Big Four make their decisions when it came to, like I think CLA did a 25% pay cut across the board. We did a kind of a staged pay cut. We called it the BDO loan because it was all paid back in December of 2020. So these short-term decisions with so much uncertainty on the horizon, working your way out of that. So who was successful? And I've always been a big believer in the long game. So I'm more inclined personally to be supportive of a culture viewpoint of let's just kind of pause and take a look and see what the other people do. Someone's bound to do something, and we'll see what we can take from it and maybe leverage it, copy it, so to speak, but form of flattery, imitate it, learn from it, adapt it to our culture because the cultures are all different. Long and the short of it is there's a war for talent right now in public accounting like I've never seen in my 25 plus years in the profession. It is unbelievable. You have Deloitte just this last week or so, 2 weeks, announcing for employees obviously in good standing, retention bonuses with clawback provisions through 2023, anywhere from $10,000 to $35,000 depending on the level. You've got PwC that said we're going fully remote, and we all, well, good luck with that. For employees in good standing. There's always a little caveat that you have to read between the lines there. So it's interesting to see who's doing what, and what we've chosen to do is senior leadership decided to keep its hands out of the pot and basically give local leadership some guidelines and some information to come up with the best alternative. For us, even with our 3 practices, depending on how we do it and what time of year we're doing it, for tax at least, we've kind of created our own, let's be in on Mondays and Thursdays, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday are completely flexible. And I'm empowering our young professionals to come up with something that works, but still giving them the insights of what helps to facilitate growth, professional growth, and relationship building, and technical expertise. Those little hints are dropped there, so we're still kind of making it up as we go. But anyways, enough on the kind of the macro view, particularly with public accounting. I'm going to turn it over to Ronnie to talk a little bit more about the salient points around the tax considerations with what we have today.
The heavy material.
The heavy material.
Before we do go on to that, I do just want to add on to this piece. I think a lot of it right now is we are all, even the employees, working through something very different. So we see very different results in surveys where we see the large majority of people want to work from home. They want that hybrid approach, but they also want more in-person connection. They don't know what they want at this point. This is all new for them too. And I think one of the things we heard from the panel earlier, I believe it was Donna that said it, is that we are now more vulnerable and honest with each other than we have been in the past. It used to be that us as the executives, as the leaders, we had to hold this really strong stance. I know what we are, I know what we do, I have to be this certain way and represent my company exactly the way our culture is. But we are at a very, very unique time where it's an opportunity for you to say, hey, listen, maybe this is a time for change. Let's open up the doors. What do we want to try now? And be real vulnerable with your people and say, let's try this out. Maybe Monday, Thursday in the office so we can have that one-on-one and we have more people in the office on those days, and then the other days you do what you want. Because if you don't make some kind of plan at all, if you wait to see what everyone else is doing, then you're leaving so much opportunity on the table. Maybe it doesn't work and you say, you know what, that didn't work. People didn't like Mondays. Let's do Wednesday, Thursday, but we're willing to try it and test out a few things. Because right now, no one knows. These things are going to keep changing. What people want is going to keep changing. I guarantee you next year, if we kept working from home, more people are going to want in-person connectivity because we can only go so long in our four walls, right? I love my dog, but I want to talk to people too. But that's what I want to say. I think I heard Donna say actually earlier, she said, be the difference was their culture, right? And I think you have to take that chance as leaders of your company to say, this is an open opportunity for us to shape the future and figure it out. Give us your ideas. What do you think? Let's try it. If it works, we'll make it a policy. If it doesn't work, we'll try something else. And we will talk about policies a little bit later. Once we do have our footing on where we want to go, what we think our future will be, when that pendulum, as they said, stops swinging, then it's time for you to put that into a policy so you have it documented, and we'll talk about that. But going into the tax piece of it, with every single one of these, and I'm going to stand up so I can point to a few of these, but with every single decision we make about remote workers, there is a tax consequence. So with that employee that Eric was talking about that went from, one state to another state to another state to another state, well, we're lucky at BDO that we're already established in all of those states. So we had the ability to report, to track his days, we have the ability to track travel, and then we have the ability to report in those states. But that's not the case for everyone, right? Most companies don't have some kind of system to track where their individuals are. But oh, by the way, did you know that as an employer, it is your obligation to know where your individuals are physically working? So the taxing authorities don't care that this happened and that people want to work from wherever. They want you, the company, to be responsible for telling the taxing authorities where these individuals are so they can be held to that tax on their income tax returns. If I get a W-2 that says that I work in North Carolina only, yet I've been in 5 different states that I incurred tax liability, do you think I'm gonna, on my own, go and file in those other 5 states? I mean, I will.
You will. I was going to say.
I will. But do you think the average person would? No. And the taxing authorities say it's your responsibility, the employer, to do that reporting so that we can hold those people responsible to that tax. If you, the company, don't do that reporting, you could be held responsible for that tax not withheld. So there's real concern around exposure here when you open yourselves to this new remote workforce, which we are all open to now. We have to be. If we want to be in that war on talent, if we want to get the best people, for the roles that we have a need, then we're going to need to open our doors and consider these hybrid work options. And there are so many things that are going to come to us in the future that are going to trigger all of these items. So I wanted to go through just high-level things on each of these for you to be thinking about. I realize that you probably have teams that handle this for you, but again, don't forget that we are all in this together, and this is new for everyone. So you as the leadership have to be ready when they come up to you and say, hey, I heard this thing called Nexus, and what does that mean for us since we have Jon Snow working in North Carolina, right? So if we can go to the next slide, I'll go through each of these in just high-level detail. Corporate tax. When you have an individual that is working in another state, you could be creating nexus in that state. By simply having one individual in a state, you could be creating a connection to that state. And nexus is that connection that you have to a state and whether or not you may have a reporting obligation there. It could be that you have a payroll reporting obligation. It could be that you have a sales and use tax obligation. There are all kinds of things that we have to consider when moving into another state for the first time. On top of that, you may have the individual may be creating individual income tax. I will say these slides are also going to be available to you. I see you're taking some pictures, and these will all be available to you too. We have more detail in here as well, so the slide deck's really good. But an individual could be a resident of one state and create residency in another state as well, because states have different rules about how you establish residency, whether it's a domicile state or residency state. Now, I'll tell you, I'm from the East Coast. I'm from Charlotte, and we see a lot of this because we have a lot, and I'm sure actually Minnesota probably has a lot of what we call snowbirds. Do you guys have those too? Okay. Yeah, so we have a lot of people that come down to North Carolina, South Carolina, to Florida in the winter time and spend the summer there, and then they come back, you know, to Minnesota, or for us it's typically New Jersey, New York for the winter. So those people will often say, oh, well, I have a house in Florida. By the way, Florida has no income tax. I have a house in Florida. That's my residence state. So I don't want to be taxed in Minnesota while I'm in Florida. Well, unfortunately, that may not be the case, right? If you have a house in Minnesota too, or that's where you typically live, you're not breaking your residency in Minnesota when you're going to Florida. You're just temporarily absent, but you're still subject to tax in Minnesota. And that's important for us to know as employers, because when that individual goes to Florida and tells you, hey, stop withholding my Minnesota tax, stop reporting and withholding Minnesota, we have to know to say, no, it's our obligation to report and withhold. So knowing those rules is going to be important, and just asking the question, right? Asking your accounting team, hey, does this sound right to you? Can we really break this residency? Because ultimately, if you do break the residency and the taxing authority finds out about it, you may be on the line for the taxes not withheld. Reciprocity agreements and other concessions are in place right now between different states, especially through COVID. There have been rules that have said if you're working remotely because of COVID in one state or the other, then you don't have to report in that other state. But the key thing I want you to take away from this is work is, the way the tax law is written doesn't always keep up with the times, right? It's really hard to change tax law. The Republicans and the Democrats don't agree on things, and you have to go through like 3 different steps to get it signed by the president, so it takes a lot to get anything changed. And tax law is still very much based on where a person physically works. Okay, so even if, you know, we have this computer and we can take it to Italy with us, we can take it anywhere, and we can work anywhere. Well, where your butt is sitting is where the taxing authority wants to tax you. So unless there's some rule that says otherwise, generally where you're physically located is where you would be taxed. There are a number of rules that say, okay, well, we can give you up to 10 days in a location before you're taxed, or it could be up to $3,000 of earnings before you're taxed in a location. They're all different. And who knows those? I do this for a living, and I have to look it up every single time because there are 50 states alone. There are, 200 countries, you know? So how are we going to keep all of that straight? And how do we expect our teams to keep that straight? And then to put it into practice and make sure we're registered and all of that. So there has to be some parameters around what you will allow your employees to do. And if we remain silent about it, then they're going to pick up their computer, they're going to put the bike in the back of the truck, and they're going to go wherever they want to go. It's important that we get ahead of this, is what I'm telling you. Social Security agreements, this is more on the international perspective. And I realize that we may not have a ton of international activity right now in this room, because I took a look at the companies. We do have some international companies in here. It's going to happen. Even if you are a locally based company, getting talent from the right places means expanding your borders. And I am seeing more people looking into Canada and other locations right now than they ever have before to get the right talent. So when we're dealing with other countries, we're also dealing with other social tax schemes. Okay, so for us, you know, the US, we pay half of our Social Security and Medicare, company pays half of our Social Security and Medicare. Well, other countries are different, and sometimes that other half could be as much as up to 50%. We're at 7.65, okay? Up to 50% in some countries. So you need to make sure to know what are the rules in that country and what am I agreeing to as an employer to pay on behalf of my individuals. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. Anything else?
I was just going to say, see if there's any questions maybe on that for...
Yeah.
So accounting firms are making fun of this and think about this, and the PEOs thinking about this, because I would argue this dynamic's always existed. It's the magnitude of how it's changing.
Agreed.
Yes.
You go into the PEO system, there's one address for it. So where are they going with this? Are you advising them? Are they thinking about this in terms of how they accommodate it?
You're talking about a professional employer organization, so you're hiring them as your payroll vendor, your HR. Okay. So for those of you who aren't familiar, a PEO is a company that you can hire that will take on the HR and payroll portion of your business. So what they do is they will employ individuals under their employer identification number, and then they do all of the reporting for payroll. So they take a lot of the ownership of payroll on for you. PEOs, watch guys, the way that things are written is they want to make sure that you stay very much in the square box, right? Like you need to make sure you, the company, know where your individual is and tell them what state they're in, and you need to make sure that they're not traveling abroad. As soon as they travel abroad, you know, they don't want to have that responsibility, because don't forget, they have 100 different companies under that one EIN. And if they put that one EIN at risk for audit, then they're opening up every single one of those companies under that EIN. So it makes sense that they want to protect themselves against any of those out-of-the-box kind of situations, and they want to protect their other companies from being exposed. So just what I would say with the PEO is it's a great option, because you're shifting a lot of the responsibility of the payroll obligation onto them, but at the same time it is it's limited in what you'll be able to do, right? What they're going to cover for you under their EIN. Are you seeing the same thing?
Well, yeah, so I find it interesting because I think they've got to give some accountability in this, because they're offering the service, right?
Yeah.
And if they're turning a blind eye and saying, we are not giving the technology solution to accommodate what is the law today. The law hasn't changed. It's just more people are now being scoped into it. Where's their culpability in that?
Yeah.
That's what I'm not seeing.
So they're going to have in the contract that these are the people they will cover. These are the individuals that they will cover, and anything outside of this, they will not cover those individuals. I've dealt with that so many times. So I've had, and I love PEOs. I refer PEOs all the time because they're a great solution in so many cases. So I'm not saying it fits some cases, it doesn't fit others. I have seen companies that have said, okay, we need to send individuals abroad, and they say, okay, we can't put them on our payroll then. And the company's like, well, this is the only payroll we have. What are we supposed to do, right? What payroll do we put them on? Our accountant is telling us that we're going to be liable for tax if we don't. And they're like, sorry, sorry, not our problem. So it is just something that you will have to be mindful of and consider your risk exposure. Compliance is a dance, right? It is definitely a dance. And sometimes you have to say, listen, if it's one person, okay, all right? But if we see that this is a goal of ours, that we want to hire these people that are not going to fit in the box, maybe we need to start considering a different platform.
I think international team, I think it's more bouncing across 50 states, because now
Yes, because the PEO is already registered in all 50 states. So they're able to pick that up for you quickly, whereas as a company, if you have that individual going to a state for the first time, then you need to get registered there with an employment and an unemployment tax identification number, and you're going to have to start filing in that state. And be careful, because I have a company that came to us and they said, oh, well, we know people are traveling everywhere, so I told my assistant to just register all states. What? I couldn't believe it. I was like, no, what are you doing? And they had registered employment and unemployment in all states. And I was like, no, because sometimes they would only need employment tax, not unemployment, because unemployment and employment are different, right?
Question for you on, so this conversation, I assume we're talking about full-time employees, right? How does this change if you're working with somebody who's a 1099? What are the conversations that your companies are having with somebody who's like, hey, I want to work contract, I'm going to travel all these places. What are the tax implications then for employers versus somebody who is full-time with you and doing that same routine?
So contract workers, great topic, because we even hit on it earlier. A lot of companies are going to contract workers right now. Again, I think of it from the session earlier, they're talking about this pendulum that's going back and forth. Companies are scared to make big moves, but they're seeing an increase in work, and they're like, let's do contractors for now, right? Instead of hiring on, or we can't find the right talent, we need a fit right now. We need someone right now, let's just get some contractors in, right? It is a great answer right now, and we're seeing an uptick of it. But I will say be careful, because this is something that has been a focus of the IRS for a very long time, is worker classification. So you need to make sure if you're bringing someone in as a contractor, that they're truly a contractor. And the way that you have to think about that is your level of control over this individual. Who tells them when, where, and how to work? If you have the majority of the control over that, you're probably an employer.
If you haven't had that discussion, if you're moving in that direction, or you haven't had the discussion yet with your existing footprint, have the discussion now more than ever.
Absolutely.
It's really bubbling to the top quickly.
And you will see very big cases like FedEx,
Yes.
for example, got hit hard because they were saying we have contractors, but they told them to wear the FedEx gear, to drive a FedEx truck,
Supplies,
gave them
direction.
schedules. And so they said, no, that's an employee. Whereas Uber, for example, an Uber employee decides what clothes they're going to wear, what car they're going to take, what schedule they'll accept if they're going to pick someone up or if they're not going to pick someone up. So you can see the difference there, right? The level of control.
Well, even that's being put under the microscope. I know we got cyber to
Yeah.
talk about, but I want to say.
Well, actually, we're just going to blend it in because I know you have more
Yeah.
tax stuff
Yeah.
here. So,
I mean,
with that,
yeah.
some of the cyber-related items
Go for
are
it.
with all the hacks going on and all the remote work and people, get up and running. You're not coming to the office. Use whatever machine you have to use. You got to get your job done. Has opened up a lot of other problems. Contractors, if you're an organization that you're trying to protect the data that you have, keep your controls around the systems, you're sending out laptops to those contractors. And so you have to manage that. And so there's security around that. So it's not just a one piece when you're looking at what's going on today, especially from a technology standpoint. We've actually made it a lot easier for the hackers. They were smart before pandemic. They don't even have to get any smarter with all the way we're doing work and what we're using for our equipment, especially if you have the bring your own device that doesn't have all the antivirus, doesn't have the multi-factor and the VPN. You've just made their life easy in the sense that they compromise that system connects into the company network. It's game on for them. And they don't even have to really disrupt you until they want to. So there's a lot of things to take into consideration as we keep working in this environment. And it may reduce costs from a office space footprint, but you should use that money if you're saving dollars on your office space and really throw it at technology, because there's probably a lot of gaps to take into consideration if you haven't figured out where that risk is. So back to the tax side of things here.
And I'll go fast because I realize we're deeper in. I could talk about this forever, this heavy stuff. But
There's a question in the back.
I do have one question. You mentioned having to look up the different states. Do you have a quick resource that you go to that gives you information state by state as to what's needed?
So I will tell you that we as BDO, we have our technology tools that we use. I use Bloomberg as one of my, or IntelliConnect as one of my major sources of information. But the best place if you don't have access to tools like that would to go onto the state gov site. So all of the state gov sites, and then they'll have an individual tab. And you can go to the individual tab and it should say in one of the very first screens who is subject to tax and how they treat residents and non-residents in that state.
And there's typically a head spinning exception to the exception to the exception
Yeah,
process.
yeah.
So
And then a
buckle
code
up.
exception and then a reciprocal
Yes.
agreement. Yes,
Oh,
yes. And I will just say, going back to the security thing, it always blows my mind when I walk into Starbucks and how many people there are working in Starbucks. And I think, wow, they've really taken this work from anywhere. They literally, right? Like, they're going to Starbucks working on a public internet connection with no screen protector. I'm like, wow, security at its best, right?
And trying to control that
Yeah.
is very, very difficult
Yeah.
unless you've taken the steps of really locking down that machine in the first place. And so I know companies go, well, that makes it tougher for our employees. We want to try to make it easy for them. We don't want to have them get discouraged. We want
already
to,
worked out,
do
they're already
whatever.
tired. We don't want them to work.
And this is one of the things that you can try to accommodate, but that's not an area that you should try to accommodate. If technology is easy for them, it is probably not secure for you from a company perspective. And I say that because, bless the hearts of our IT folks within, we are probably the worst customer of our own IT people as a practitioner. But they are doing a great job on locking down our laptops. Before, hook up the wireless and go print from wherever. Can't do that anymore. If you're not printing to a company designated printer, you are not printing from your work machine. And why is that? Printers are internet technology driven devices, and they can be hacked, and they do get hacked. So if you can just connect to any printer out there, you are opening up a tunnel back into your laptop of possible risk from hacking. So it's not an easy thing locking down the USBs with the remote workforce and the highly transit workforce right now. If you're not looking at where that data may be going, meaning you're not monitoring the movement of big chunks of data, employees copying things, maybe not on purpose, but they're like, hey, I need this on my machine because I'm going to go somewhere else and I don't want to connect in. And then all of a sudden maybe they leave and they have that information. That's your risk, and so you need to be having solutions in place to monitor the data, stop the data from getting copied in big chunks, know where it is, not let it get moved off the laptops easily, things like that from a security standpoint. And if they're at Starbucks, not letting their machines be automatically connected to other things that are at Starbucks.
Even things like the router, right? Like, I didn't know this, but evidently most routers come with the same
Default password. I
default
can get into
password.
every one of them if they haven't changed the passwords. Yep.
I didn't know that. I mean,
so-
thank
You're a
goodness.
tax person, so come on.
Listen, I never played IT or security. Okay, but quickly, because I do want to make sure we leave time for questions and for some.
I'll keep interrupting you so
Oh,
you
good.
can keep
Payroll tax, again, this is that one that I've been hitting on. You have to get registered. Make sure you're only registering where you have to, because you're only creating more headaches for yourself if you're getting registered in a location and then you have to file there. They're looking for tax returns and they're giving you notices because they haven't gotten anything, and then close them down when you don't need them anymore. Okay, that's the best advice I can give you.
Question on the payroll tax and COVID relief overlay. How do you factor that in from a remote worker standpoint?
Okay, so you can just about at this point say goodbye to those. So they're
Almost into 2021, right?
Yeah, so they have kept extending them and kept extending them. So, if you haven't done anything yet, you may be covered under some of that support from the taxing authorities. Not all states did it. Some states did, some states didn't. But at this point, I would say my best advice to you is to function as if they're not there. Because we don't know, typically they don't extend until like the day of. Sometimes it's past the date that it expired that they extend. So we don't know. And at this point, I think you have to assume that what's happening now is going to happen long term. So function as if those aren't even there and start complying based on what the typical rules are. With equity compensation, anyone have equity compensation? So just be mindful of that equity compensation, that it's generally sourced over the life of the vesting period. And as employers, you're supposed to report to the state that they earned the vesting. So if they were in California and then Minnesota and then North Carolina, you may, at the time that that taxable event happens, you may have 3 states of reporting for that taxable event. So just be mindful of that. And then transfer pricing, where we're putting costs. So, where we're putting costs, we need to be mindful of that and probably take a look at our transfer pricing right now, because it's changing. So if we have individuals working in other locations, we may need to do some transfers to the other entity. Okay. Immigration. Okay, you can't work where you don't have work authorization. You can't, where you're physically sitting, you have to have work authorization there. So someone can't just say, I want to go work in Italy. They have to have the right to physically work there, even if they're working for a U.S. company. Okay, you're physically in Italy, they want you to have work authorization there. So just be mindful of that, because people say, oh, well, I want to go work with grandma in Italy. Well, you could have a non-documented worker in Italy if you say yes to that. Compensation and benefits, where a person sits, that local law typically reigns. So if you tell somebody you can work in Italy, I'm going to keep on using Italy, you may be also agreeing to whatever termination agreements they have, which could be a year, 2 years in some countries before you can terminate someone. There may be some kind of vacation payouts, 13th month pays, all kinds of things that you would be subject to by letting somebody work in that country or in that other jurisdiction. California, being the main one here in the U.S., has all kinds of extra rules around maternity leave, overtime pay, things like that that you would be subject to if they weren't there. And then talent management, you want to make sure that you're still, if you're saying, okay, fine, you can work in Italy, but what time do our customers need you available, right? We have time zone differences here. What access do you have to internet connection? We were talking about yesterday the amount of the world that still does not have access to internet, to reliable internet. It's much higher than you would expect. So, there are all these other things you want to make sure that they are able to continue to do their job appropriately in that location. All right, I'll skip.
You're out of time.
Yeah, we have,
No.
yes, we need to wrap up, because we do have another session that starts in a few minutes. So you can either finish up or just see if there's questions about things that we want to, before you want to.
Yeah, do you want to take a little bit more?
Yeah, no, I tried to insert, but you had a lot more important stuff to say. But on the IT side of it, I would just I'll be around for a while. I can answer questions. But with what the remote workforce is doing, and you really do need to try to accommodate, because that is what we all have to do. And it's not saying they shouldn't use other devices, but you need to treat those other devices as you would treat a company device, meaning the antivirus, the multi-factor, pushing things down onto those devices, which they may not be really happy with, being able to wipe it if it gets stolen, like our laptops, if they're stolen, they can wipe our machines remotely. Those are the kinds of things you want to be taking into account here, because when they're working from Starbucks and they walk away for a little bit, it's real. Those systems disappear very, very quickly. We have some clients that aren't even in that remote work environment, and they've seen an uptick of breaking into the offices where people are working and machines just getting stolen right from the office. So things to take into consideration as to how you need to improve the security around all of your systems. But
Yeah,
I'll
and
leave it
all
at
of
that.
this is in the deck too, and I think you're going to pass out the deck. We put a lot of material in there, and like Greg, I'm going to be around. So
The takeaway is if you don't have a remote worker policy, you may need one.
Yes, you do.
Yes. Once you finally decide how you're going to handle this, then you need to get it in writing, because you don't want exceptions, right? You want to try to minimize any exceptions. Exceptions are dangerous.
Thank you to our panel.